Hello and welcome to another episode of LTS, where I buy some garbage go-kart and then realize that's a sketchy death trap. On this episode we have, I'm not even sure what to classify this as. I think it was either a Manco or a Yerf Dog back in the day, or a Chinese clone. I'm leaning towards it was a legitimate one because the tubing that was used is 120 wall, which I don't think we'd really see in Chinese garbage go-karts. I found on the marketplace the seller is not the one that did any work on it. He just got it from a neighbor or something. The tires are date coded 2013. Let's say the thing was probably built in like 14 or 15. And they definitely didn't get that far with it. There's panels that are not welded. There's tubes that are removed and not replaced. And all in all, like, they've definitely structurally compromised it, but not to the point that it's not salvageable. So the seller was asking $300. I offered 140 because it had been on the marketplace for like 20 weeks, and he accepted it. It was also raining and dark when I went to get it, and neither of us wanted to be outside, so I think he just wanted it gone. And I'll go into summary of the worst bits. If these are the worst bits, you can kind of figure how the rest of it is. There's not good stuff. Like, someone with rabies went at it with a Sawzall. All right, so I figure I'll just go through the worst of the sketchy things that are on here. There are lots of just average sketchy things. We've got steering that is entirely relative. You want to go left? Okay, no problem. That one's got a head start. Okay, now they're both going. Oh, the other one's taking the lead. And then, oh, the other one goes the opposite direction. It just gives up on life. I love this. This is awful. We've got free water. There we go. Oh, there's so much sludge in there that it... What the fuck? Well, how is it doing that? That was a mistake. There's holes in the floor. This cart is also the Super Leggera model. It comes with natural weight savings. We have this nice battery that reads at 0.8 volts. We have a gas tank that contains a swamp. Just kind of sludge everywhere. I've come to find out that most of the bolts on this go-kart do not have nuts on them. They're just in mock-up, which only leads me to believe that this cart has been neutered. I was going to record doing a quick cleanup of this thing, but when I tipped it up, it kind of just cleaned up itself. So I guess I don't need to film that anymore. I'm still trying to piece together the history of this thing. I have no idea what the original frame was that they started with, but the work that's been done has mostly been okay. Like, the welding is actually pretty decent from what I can tell underneath the rust. The parts that I found so far, like this gas tank and the wiring, look to be off of like a GY6 Chinese moped. This tank and a couple other components are not even worth trying to use. They're just trashed. On top of using mix and match parts, they also use mix and match hardware, which sucks because it's randomly metric and randomly SE and all these different sizes. And this is actually stainless, but we'll remove all the crap we don't need, and then we can kind of formulate a game plan for what to do with the thing. Apparently, there was a spider nest in the roof of this thing, and they had babies. Spider babies meet natural selection. Okay, back to work. Hello, can I have my socket back, please? No? You're just gonna keep it? I just bought this one too, because the last 10 mil disappeared. Okay, in the trash. This is one of the good things someone made. It's a mechanical linkage for the brakes, which is pretty cool. It's got an adjustable tie rod on that end, which doesn't even look to be salvageable, except maybe the ends. Pillow blocks, this is overkill. The battery box they even made. So like, it seems like this whole section is not original. Like, this square tubing is clearly not original because the whole frame is round tube, not square tube. So that was added for sure. And the battery box, which actually looks to be nice, probably off something else. It's a little too nice to be made by whoever built this. But again, pillow blocks, which only have one bolt in each side. I'm just gonna remove this portion of the bracket because we're definitely not using angle iron to operate the brakes. More than likely, we'll go to hydraulic. That might be salvageable. Okay, more trash. The more I look at this cart, the more I realize that they really didn't get far with their build. I found lots of incomplete welds. I found lots of marks of like skipping cutoff wheels and sawzalls. This plate isn't even welded down the bottom here. Also, the thing they didn't do was add any sort of drain. So water just collects on the floor pan here and then rots it away, which is why the floor pan looks as bad as it does. They also welded random things, but then left things unwelded too. Like the tie rods are welded, the rear wheels are welded on, but then there's tubing and stuff that's not completely welded. It looks like they cut and notched this front end to angle it back to give it, I guess that'd be more caster, but they only tacked the front of it. They didn't weld the back at all. It seems like they just mocked it back up to sell it or to get rid of it or whatever, or they just straight up stopped. I really have no idea. One thing I thought was kind of interesting was you can see right here was the original brace that went to the floor. They cut that out, left the nub off there, and then they put in another pipe, which isn't really welded in. It's tacked in a couple spots, but like you're not gonna be able to see it, but there's a gap right there where it's just not even welded. The bottom again has tacks, and then back here you can see what's left of the pipe. I assume that went over here somewhere. There's lots of sections, like there's a pipe that was right there, there's an incomplete weld right there, but not a big deal. I'm definitely happy this thing doesn't have an engine because I would have been tempted to ride the thing as it sits. And then on this side, the original tube is gone, but then there's no replacement tube. So the only support here is the sheet metal, which isn't even sheet metal, it's fairly thick, but again, there's no bracing here any longer. And there's just random holes like throughout the frame. There's the other nub of the tube that was there. All sorts of fun stuff going on here. It's gonna take a little while to get it all cleaned up and where we need it to be. At this point, I'm kind of just looking at this project as practice welding, because like even that tube back there that would have normally gone like right there, there's a big old gash from, I assume, a Sawzall or something. This one will probably have to go back, maybe move it a little bit closer. It depends on where the seat ends up sitting. It's no real surprise this battery's pretty much toast. It seems to have held a charge. I've been charging on 2 amp for off and on probably 10 hours total. It boils over like immediately, so I'm gonna just turn on. So it's still holding 12 volts, which is good. I'll give it a couple minutes and it almost guarantee it's gonna start boiling. And if you don't know, when you boil a battery, it releases hydrogen gas, which is explosive. So that's not ideal. It's probably safe to say I'm not gonna use that battery. I just thought it was kind of interesting that it's so compromised that it boils over like immediately. So it's been cooking for about 2 minutes at 2 amps. Listen to this. It's just sitting there boiling away. Got everything cleaned up, well, relatively cleaned up, and just by that I mean removing all the scaling paint so that I can treat the rust underneath. Added in a couple drain holes. The ones here, as soon as I drilled them, even though the thing was laying on its side, they started squirting out water. We want to try to eliminate as many water traps as possible because they can structurally compromise the tubing from the inside. Got new nuts on the control arms because they were just missing entirely. And then now I just got to weld up a couple spots on the underside here, and then we can treat it with the rust paint. I already knew this square tubing wasn't original, but it's also barely welded in. The top halves are welded. You can tell they didn't roll this chassis on its side to do this because all of the gaps where the things meet, they didn't fill them in with weld. I'm gonna come through, just clean up a little bit more so the weld will actually stick, and then we can go ahead and treat the stuff with rust paint. More or less a safety thing at this point. I got all the welds complete on the underside here and then treated everything on the underside here with rust paint just to protect it. I don't plan to be under here anytime soon. I might as well just not ignore the fact that the floor is rusting out. I might as well address it now and then be able to not worry about it in the future. So yeah, a lot more welding, a lot more grinding. I'm not gonna film it because it makes a mess. I've already set off my fire alarm twice. These welds right here are not complete. They only finished the front half of them. So I'm gonna do my best to get around the back side and get those filled in. And I'm also gonna fill in these 2 little holes here. I think I've gotten all the welds cleaned up that I need to, and also cleaned up any residual weld and slag from previous installs and stuff. So it's as good as I can be bothered to get it right now. Obviously things are gonna have to change when it comes time to put an engine in. So I just wanna stop the rust currently. We're gonna use this stuff, which I use on pretty much every project at this point. But I only have 3 cans, so we're gonna see how far that gets us. This isn't gonna be the color it's gonna stay. So we'll just get at it real quick and we'll see how far we get with 3 cans. Still trying to kind of figure out a game plan here, but just mock some stuff up just to kind of envision it and also see how much space there actually is. It seemed like there was a lot of space in it, but once I put a seat and an engine in it, not so much. The only real pain in the butt is they welded on the rear wheels. So it looks like these are lawnmower wheels that would normally require a woodruff key. And instead of making that work on a smooth axle shaft, they just welded them. So I can't really remove them. This one doesn't hold air. They're dry rotting and they are going bald here in the center. You can see the nubs are way shorter on the interior than the exterior. So they don't have a whole lot of life left. But that's not even the worst of it. The worst of it is that this rear end is no longer serviceable because every single component of it is welded together. It can still work as it is for now. It's really just a matter of determining a power plant or finding one for that matter. I have this Briggs 206, which I was planning to build into an animal clone. I don't know if it's going to be enough, and also it's still pull start, which I'm not a fan of. I would prefer to have electric start on this. It just seems kind of stupid to have to start it and then get into the thing. I'd rather be able to just push a button and then go. At this point, I need to just find a donor or just find an engine. But in any case, if you have any ideas, feel free to chime in. I'm all ears. I know I illustrated what happens when you turn the wheel, where the steering is kind of just relative. It kind of just does whatever it feels like. But I didn't show what happens when you compress the springs, in which case they toe in and also camber in. They do even less of what you want them to do. So all of that is horrific. The steering is fairly easy to fix. The suspension is just awful. I don't know why it does what it does. I'm not going to deal with figuring out all the steering geometry and suspension geometry because it's not worth it. So bump steer is probably going to stay, but the relative steering is, that's just, there's no way that's acceptable. It's just, that is my favorite. I'm not sure how well you can see it on camera, but the cart sits squatted in the rear. The front is about 2 inches higher than the rear. And the options to fix that would be put shorter shocks on the front and leave the rear as it is, but then we get less suspension travel. So what I think I'm going to end up doing is, one, the tires in the back suck anyway, and they're welded on, which isn't ideal. And I do have these blaster wheels that have just been sitting on the shelf for forever. It would raise it and make it about even. So I've ordered shocks for the front. I've ordered, I think it's like 12 3/4 inch shocks. So that'll raise the front about, let's say, 1/2 inch, which would then make the front 2.5 inches higher. The wheels for the blaster that I have on the rear are 3 inches taller than the wheels currently on it. So that should, once those are all installed, mean things sits equal. And also we would gain about 3 inches of ground clearance in the rear, which is good because then it won't look like it's got the weird squat thing going on. The other issue is the rear axle is a 1 inch. Finding a hub that fits 1 inch, but also the bolt pattern of a blaster, which is 4x100, is damn near impossible. But I do still have the hubs from the blaster, which measure interior diameter of 0.97. So what I'm thinking is that I can probably have a machine shop mill out to make it right about 1 inch, and then I can install them onto the axles, which would then adapt them to run the blaster wheels. So I think that's probably the best route. I think that axle is going to go away in the future anyway, but at least in the meantime, the tires that are on currently are trash. They don't hold air, they're dry rotted, and the one has a tube, the one doesn't, and still neither of them hold air. The front are the same case. So being that it won't take all that much to get this thing running, I'd like to at least have the chassis ready to go before that, so that way I can just slap the engine on, focus on making it run versus also making it safe and have good tires and all this and that. So yeah, I think in summary, this is actually a pretty good purchase. I didn't pay a whole lot for it, and there's good enough bones here that I can actually work with it and not just die immediately. I think it's a pretty good place to wrap up. I have a lot to do, a lot of parts to order, a lot of brainstorming that needs to be done on the direction of this build. But instead of just dragging out this episode by doing a bunch of tedious stuff like more grinding and more cutting and more welding, I'll just end it off here because that stuff doesn't look good on camera, and also I don't want to film it. I'm still leaning towards a quad engine because one, I'd like to get an electric start, so that's really the only criteria is electric start. The game plan will kind of just develop itself as I find things for sale. We're really at the whim of the marketplace. So yeah, I think it's a good place to wrap up. With all that being said, thanks for watching and stay tuned. Ew, what the fuck? Got gas tank juice on me. That's nasty. I can't even tell if it's gas anymore. I think it's water. I have no idea. It's really gross though. Okay, don't come out. That's also fine.